Thanks a lot, Michael. Thanks for the opportunity to present our research, our ideas on ethics of sustainability here. So first, a short introduction. Philipp is a philosopher by training. He is now part of the Young Academy for Sustainability Research. And I'm a psychologist working here at the Institute of Psychology at the University of Freiburg. And actually, we both met first in the context of LivMats. This is the excellence cluster on living material systems, in which we addressed a lot of questions regarding societal issues, societal acceptance due to novel technologies. And during this work together, a lot of the ideas that we will present today came up. And with this, I hand over to Philipp, who will start.
Yeah, hi. I'm also very happy to talk to you about ethics of sustainability. I will first introduce a bit what is sustainability and why do we need ethics of sustainability in the Anthropocene. Then I will hand over to Andrea, and she will talk about empirical research in the context of great acceleration. And then I will again talk about empirical ethics. What is that? And after that, Andrea will talk about acceptance research for emerging technologies. And at the end, we will conclude and give you a short outlook where we will not only talk about cognitive affective maps, but also about another method we developed, the so-called ethics scale for technology assessment. So we come to the first point. If we go back to the origins of sustainability, that's a concept that was created in the 18th century. Especially it was coined by Hans Karl von Carlowitz in 1713 in his Sylvicultura Economica. And then this concept was also used in that special sense, sustainability, Nachhaltigkeit, in other languages and other countries. So it was about the use of wood in the domestic economy. So it was an economical concept, and the original idea was that there should be an equality between the growth and increase and Zuwachs on the one side and the removal of the wood on the other side, as they had a lot of problems at that time in Saxonia with regard to mining. And the first time when we could say an ethics of sustainability was developed, that was in the 20th century with Hans Jonas in 1979 with his famous monograph, The Imperative of Responsibility. His diagnosis was that we have fundamental transformations by modern technologies. There he saw a threat of nuclear war, ecological ravage, and genetic engineering and many other things. And for this purpose, he developed a new imperative that built on Kant's famous categorical imperative, but he modified it for the 20th century, his so-called ecological imperative: act so that the effects of your action are compatible with the permanence of genuine human life. So the idea was, with regard that we have a bigger reach of technology, we also need a greater reach of ethics in terms of space and time. That means on the one side, we need biocentric ethics. That means it's a bigger space. We also have to include nature as something that is now vulnerable with regard to modern technologies, animals, and so on. But we have also to look forward in time with regard to intergenerational justice, with regard to future generations. The other thing reason why we need an ethics of sustainability is the diagnosis of the Anthropocene, a term coined in 2000 on a conference in Mexico, as far as we know, by Paul Crutzen, the Nobel Prize winner. And he published that idea 2002 in a only one-sided Nature article, Geology of Mankind. What is the Anthropocene? He defined it as the present, in many ways, human-dominated geological epoch that is human dominated because of all the effects, especially technological effects of humanity on the global environment. He thought of humanity as a major environmental force. And already at that time, he called for human behavior at all scales, and we will build on that concept. But at that time, he only thought of internationally accepted large-scale geoengineering projects. So he thought more or less only on technological solutions. The reason why we have to act here is especially the so-called great acceleration. That means we have an exponential increase in many areas of human culture on the one side and the biosphere on the other side. For example, here on the left side, we have an exponential in growth with regard to human population, with regard to the production, for example, of motor vehicles, but also with regard to the biosphere. The most important is CO2 with regard to climate change, but also N2O nitrogen and CH4 methane and many other areas. And the other point is that we already transgressed 6 of 9 planetary boundaries as defined originally by Rockström. So we have a transgression with regard to novel entities, especially plastic, for example, climate change, CO2, radiative forcing, biosphere integrity, especially biodiversity, land system use, fresh water change, green, blue, that means surface water, groundwater, and water in natural soil, and biochemical flows, especially phosphor and nitrogen, where we have these transgression and tipping points. When we transgress it, then we will leave as they called it, the safe operating space within the biosphere. We already have some regulations, starting with the Brundtland report in 1987, where they defined sustainable development in a way that already Hans Jonas thought of, that we have to look for future generations and to meet also their needs. Then in 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, there they coined the principle of the precautionary principle, also principle that goes back to Hans Jonas, that we have to act despite lack of full scientific certainty. And then maybe the most important is the 2030 agenda, where they articulated the 17 sustainable development goals with 169 sub-goals that looks on problems within the biosphere, but also with regard to economy and society. We have already these regulations, but on the other side, when we look at all these goals, or especially the 3 areas of sustainability, the 3 columns or aspects of sustainability, that means environment, but also society and economy, we will see a lot of conflicts, even when we favor strong sustainability. That means that we favor especially environment, that's the most important. Even then, we will have conflicts. We have to make weight decisions. So when we ask what is the relation between ethics and sustainability, as I already showed you, sustainability is informed by ethical principles. If we look back to Hans Jonas, his ethics of responsibility I talked about. But on the other side, sustainability still needs ethics when we have these ethical conflicts, when we need weight decisions. There we do not only need ethical principles, abstract ethical principles, but on the other side, we also have to involve people. We need empirical surveys. And by saying that, I hand over to Andrea, and she will talk a bit more about empirical research.
Yes, thank you. So as Philipp has said already, we have these conflicts, and we have to find solutions how to best deal with these conflicts. And in order to really give people a voice, we need empirical research. This shall be empirical research with the aim to measure values, attitudes, and also beliefs towards emerging problems, towards real problems in the lives of people, and also towards potential technical solutions. Now, psychology has a good toolbox in order to measure things, and we have two main different types of measures. On the one hand, we have quantitative measures. These are usually questionnaires. On the other hand, we have qualitative measures. These are usually interviews. And in the following, I would like to shortly show you that both types of measurements have important limitations, and therefore we propose a third type of measurement. So the limitations of quantitative methods are that they include only scales, topics, or items that the researchers are already aware of. And especially in these great accelerating times, it might be very likely that we miss novel aspects of attitudes, of predictors that we then cannot research on with our quantitative methods. In order to dive into novel aspects, we usually use qualitative interviews. However, everybody who ever worked with qualitative interviews know that this is a very time-consuming technique, and usually qualitative interviews are therefore only done with a small number of participants. And now we propose here a novel method that are cognitive affective maps to assess values, attitudes, and belief systems. And in the following, I will explain to you what are these cognitive affective maps. They were first introduced by a philosopher, and here the philosopher used these maps in order to depict conflicts and in order to use them, this depiction of attitudes of people for conflict resolution. So here are two very easily and very small camps. On the left side, you see of the conservative ideology, where freedom is very important. On the right side, on the progressive ideology, where equality is really important. And up to now, these camps were used by researchers, and they were drawn by researchers themselves in order to make a topic or a conflict really available. What we now did in the last years, we developed these camps as a measurement system so that laypersons themselves can construe such camps. But first, what actually is a camp? You can consider of a cognitive affective map as a kind of mind map. Like each mind map, there are concepts nodes that the participants themselves draw. And importantly now within camps, each concept node gets an affective connotation, meaning it gets rated as positive. There are 3 steps for positive, as negative, 3 levels of negative, or a concept may remain neutral, or it may be termed as ambivalent, meaning that it is an affectively laden concept that involves positive as well as negative aspects. Now, these concept nodes are connected with each other, and there might be suppurative connections, meaning the more A, the more B, or A and B go together. Inhibiting connections, like the more A, the less B, or both inhibit each other. And we also introduced that these connections can be unilateral, meaning only A has an impact on B, but not vice versa. Now, in order to use these camps for large-scale service, we first came up with software applications in order to draw the camps online. And this enables us to really collect large samples. And with large samples, I really mean 300 participants answering a camp on a topic, for example. Just for your information, we now have 2 different types of softwares. Both are freely available and both can be used by researchers who are interested to use this technology. When we analyze the CAMs, we can do this in 2 different ways. First of all, we can analyze them in a quantitative way, meaning that we look at the effective ratings of the concept nodes. Here we either look at the mean balance of the complete CAM or just at the mean balance of single concept nodes. And we can apply network parameters, for example, number of concepts or density. This relates to the number of connections normalized by all possible connections, and so on. Currently, we are working on the validation of several network parameters. We see that effective ratings are already a good predictor. And we can really analyze the CAMs in a qualitative way. And like for each kind of qualitative analysis, 2 different types of analysis are feasible. We can work deductively, meaning that we predefine a list of arguments and check to which degree the CAMs do involve them. Or we can work based on grounded theory, meaning that we look whether CAMs point us to novel, not yet investigated factors. And after introducing the methodology to you, we now present some examples on how we used it in our research.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. Now I will explain a bit more what is an empirical ethics. As I said in the first part of our presentation, we have a lot of conflicts when we look at the sustainable development goals. For example, economy may be in some ways opposed to the protection of biosphere, or as Konrad Ott defined, we have a lot of problems within the Anthropocene. We have population growth, poverty, agricultural problems, urbanization, migration, climate change, freshwater problems, nature conservation, and we always have conflicts between these different points. For example, when we want to do nature conservation, we will not be able to solve the problem of poverty in general, because we need a lot of agriculture for that. And so Konrad Ott's diagnosis was that we cannot fulfill all or that we cannot solve all these problems here. So what should we do? All these points have to do with certain values that are important here. So we can define values and we can weigh these areas against each other with regard to values. In ethics, we make especially a difference between intrinsic values that can you see here. I hope it's not too small in this figure from a Nature article from 2023. Intrinsic values are values that means something has an inherent worth. It's an end in itself. On the other side, we have a lot of instrumental values. That means something is a mean to an end. So intrinsic values are more important. But then we also have relational values. That means values where something is desirable, meaningful for certain people, a group of people, or even for a whole culture. But how we define and weigh these values against each other has always to do with worldviews, with knowledge systems. So if we look at our Western culture, we often prefer more anthropocentric views. So we have more instrumental values. If we look at, for example, indigenous cultures, there we have often biocentric, ecocentric, or pluricentric worldviews that favor intrinsic or relational values. So it always depends on your cultural background. If you look especially on technologies, Christoph Hubig, philosopher of technology, defined values for technology. For example, we look at functionality, but also safety, environmental quality, and so on. But also here we have conflicts between all these values. So we have to weigh these values against each other. We have to define more important values, and he defined two sorts of values. On the one side, option values. These values give us the option for action, viability, for future. On the other side, we have legacy values. Legacy values are values that are identity forming, that are important in certain traditions, and in case of doubt, we should, that is his recommendation, we should favor legacy values. On the other side, we have to make a very important difference between acceptability and acceptance. Acceptability, that means something is recognized as a societal principle, as a priority, as an adopted norm that we even find in laws or is protected by laws. On the other side, we have acceptance. That means it's an empirically ascertainable behavior of certain persons or even groups that tolerate certain actions. But the relation between these two principles, acceptance and acceptability, is dynamic. For example, if something that is acceptable for a long time is not anymore accepted by certain people, certain groups, then we will also change what is acceptable. So that means, in addition to generally acceptable ethical, abstract, universal ethical principles, we have always also to look at what is accepted by various stakeholders, groups, and how can we do that? We can do that by empirical ethics that looks at these both areas, and for that we can use what Andrea introduced, the cognitive affective maps. We have done that in a case study in the context of a seminar on sustainability and its ethical philosophical foundations. I've done this study together with Lisa Reuter. So we ask 18 students to draw a pre-cam before the class, and at the end of the ethics seminar, they had also to draw another post-cam. I give you only one example, one cam by one student. It was in German, but I translate for you. We had the central concept node, imitation of nature through technology. And the student mentioned, for example, more knowledge about nature, sustainability, preserves raw materials, substitutes natural products, loss of relation to nature, compatibility, doubtful, generates workplaces. And when we had all these camps, we asked two student assistants to evaluate these camps with regard to ethical arguments that we could find in Angelika Krebs' book Ethics of Nature. So they identified, for example, here some arguments, the pedagogic argument. I will not explain here all in detail what that is. I can answer that in the Q&A section. The dependency argument for strong sustainability, then design argument, aesthetics argument, harmony argument, basic needs argument when it comes to general workplaces. So we had all these 20 ethical principles, and we could see at the beginning or at the end the students mentioned more principles, and the second was that they mentioned more principles with the exact wording of the ethical principles. So what were the results? We can say laypersons implicitly apply principles of the ethics of nature without being able to name them explicitly. Then we can say camps are a suitable tool to combine empirical approach with a conceptual, a normative approach. And but we have to admit it's only a first promising step for an interdisciplinary collaboration between psychology and ethics. But this is, as we think, important with regard to the increasingly rapid development of new technology. It's a procedure that can help us to keep pace with a great acceleration and to incorporate the perspectives of all those who are involved and will be involved, all those stakeholders. So by this method, we can apply or we can look at acceptance and acceptabilities with regard to the empirical ethics. Empirical ethics tries to recognize culturally specific, group specific, or even individual specific attitudes. And by saying that, I hand over again to Andrea, and she will talk about acceptance research a bit in more detail.
Exactly, and you may first wonder why I talk about acceptance for emerging technologies, but we actually believe, and there are already numbers on it, that our sustainability goals can only be held if we include climate engineering technologies. And here I present an example on how we use the CAMs to complement really state-of-the-art models in order to predict acceptance for emerging technologies, in this case for a specific climate engineering technology, the stratospheric aerosol injection. Now, when we want to do this search with lay people, we have faced several challenges. First is that we really have to describe the emerging technology for which demonstrators or prototypes are missing. And we usually do this by formulating scenario text. And here in our focus on the stratospheric aerosol injection, we first developed a very well-balanced scenario text in which we explained stratospheric aerosol injection. You might know this technique. The idea is that airplanes put sulfur dioxides in the stratosphere so that the sunlight is reflected more, and this can prevent heating up for around 1 degree when we have 6,000 airplanes per year. So it's a rather cheap idea. Now, what we usually do is when we want to assess or when we want to predict acceptance, we have to find suitable models. And this is usually done by literature research. So here we came up based on our literature review with a model that is kind of often predicted. Acceptability, or in this case, it's more psychological acceptance, depends on risk and benefit perception. Thereby, we know that really positive and negative effect have a lot of impact. Of course, trust in the technologies, and in addition, some ethical and personality factors, socio-demographics, and also knowledge play. Now, the problem here is, does current research, so does a literature review really find all possible factors that might impact on the acceptance of novel technologies? And in order to check this, we conducted a study with these cognitive affective maps. And what we did in principle is we first had a pre-study in which participants were informed about the stratospheric aerosol injection with our scenarios. And then 58 participants really draw CAM on their attitudes, values related to this technique, very broad on their thoughts about this technology. Based on the analysis of these cognitive affective maps, we informed our later research about potentially missing factors. And in the main study, we then a questionnaire study in which we included novel scales in order to address these missing factors. Now here, just for you to give you an impression on how such CAMs look like, We had a large variety of positive and negative affective connotations. Here on the left, you see the CAM of one participant who was overall more positive. On the right side, a CAM that is very, very negative. And what we did here is we aggregated all the CAMs together, and then we identified additional predictors. And in detail, these were the following predictors, namely climate change concern, moral hazard, and an argument that humans shall not tamper with nature. We then added we searched for scales and questionnaires in order to address these novel missing factors in our survey. And here we adjusted existing scales, and we came up with an own ethics scale for technology acceptance that Philipp will explain in detail, in more detail later. So here you can see now what CAMS did in order to enrich our acceptance model. Just the single argument, you should not or you should tamper with nature, has a huge impact, and it is a main predictor on the negative effect on the one hand, on the positive effect with a negative correlation on the other hand. It impacts directly on acceptability and via trust and benefit perception. So with this, we see that the CAMs can really do a good job in order to enrich our current methods that we have. And with this, I hand over to Philipp again.
Yeah, thank you. And now we come to the conclusion of the small outlook. So what we can say, ethics of sustainability must take into account ecological, social, and also economic aspects. But for that, we have to look at different values that play a role in all these three areas. These must be determined empirically and weighed up, as I told you, against each other on the basis of ethical principles. So it's necessary to combine empirical data collection with a reflection on ethical principles. And so we have to combine psychology and ethics. We can do that, as we have explained, by a cognitive affective mapping. That is a very decisive methodological building block, especially when it comes to evaluate emerging sustainable technologies. We can also do in that way an ethics in real time. That means that we can apply this method at different stages of technological development. But we have to admit it's only one methodological building block for an ethic of sustainability. And as we showed in an article, we should integrate different methods. Here you can see one method is cognitive affective mapping, but we can also integrate online surveys, or we can, and that's our outlook, we can integrate what we called ESTA, ethics scale for a technology assessment that we are still developing together with Julius Fenn. ESTA measures the degree to which respondents believe a technology is morally acceptable with regard to 6 ethics theories, for example, utilitarianism and hedonism. As an example, we used 3 technologies. On the one side, a nanoparticle, it's something like a futuristic, intelligent jacket. It's very interesting from an ethical point of view because it's close to your body. Then a social robot, and we already talked about a spheric aerosol injection. So the participants were first informed about the different types of ethics. Here, for example, virtue ethics on the left side. And then on the right side, they had to answer questions that are connected to these ethical theories. Very shortly to the results, it was very interesting to see that virtue ethics was consistently evaluated higher, that you can see here on the right side. And on the other side, can talk about more in the Q&A section about that. On the other side, it contributed to the acceptability model Andrea talked about. And by saying that, I thank you very much, and we are very curious about your questions.